Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you all. Apologize for the delay this morning. Apparently, I have forgotten a lot of things about Eastern, and one of those things is these buttons. I used to be here about 10 years ago when I came into the US for the first time. This was my home. I spent the first 2 years here. So this place has a very, very special place in my heart. So let's get started. I would like to welcome you. We have a great panel of speakers. We have invited a number of high-profile faculty members from not just Eastern, but also from outside. We are very happy to have Dr. Dorothy Espelach here. We have Dr. Justin Patchen. So these are some of those people among the list of high-profile speakers that we would like to welcome here today. So as we get started, Dr. Mildred Pearson, she specially asked me to start the presentation with this video.
Kids, boys will be boys, they're just crew of this age.
Here what we get is nothing's wrong, we didn't do anything, everything's fine.
They would punch me, strangle me, take things from me, sit on me.
He's not safe on that bus. I've been on that bus. They are just as good as gold.
My voice is not going to lost on. I will go to my grave until a difference is made.
Parents that have lost kids, parents of kids that have been voted all over the world, and they took off like wildfire.
All it takes is for one person to stand up.
Be the difference. Go out and find that one child, that new kid standing over there by himself. Be willing to stand up for him.
Everything starts with one and builds up. Eventually we have an army.
If we're all done together, we will change the world.
let me invite Dr. Melanie Mills to take on the stage. Dr. Melanie Mills, her profile is here, but let me tell you something that I know about her. As Dr. Pearson had to leave the country, she took over and she did a lot of things that we were all worried, how are those things going to be done? So you sitting here is a testament of her hard work with the rest of the team, but she took the charge, she took the lead, and made everything happen today. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you. So you'll do the slideshow? Will you continue in the slideshow? No, that's it. Okay. Well, of course, a conference like this does not happen by the work of one person alone. So I would like to take a moment to thank the planning committee. Their names are in your programs. They're walking around with shirts like this or the event shirts on. If you have questions during the day, they're your go-to people to ask. The committee has done a heroic job, particularly in the last month, but you should know that we've been working on this since February. So before that video came out that Dr. Pearson had you view here this morning, this committee was working on providing a conference to address a very serious issue of bullying in our schools and in our communities. We have had wonderful institutional support, and I would like to recognize several administrators who are here. Dr. Perry, our president, is here. Dr. Jackson, where are you? Okay. Is Dr. Irwin here? I have not seen her, but we have faculty and university employees representing 6 academic departments on this planning committee, so it is very much an interdisciplinary experience. We have sought to provide for you a very broad-based information set about the very human issues of bullying. So it is our desire today to not make this an academic conference, but rather to provide you with practical information that goes beyond awareness, which means we're not going to lecture to you. Can I hear a collective sigh of relief there? But rather, our intent is to equip you with practical suggestions about how to address this issue in our classrooms and in our community. A few housekeeping things. Again, you can ask people with the shirts where to find restrooms, food, and so forth. There is a list of lunch options in your folder because lunch is on your own. We have a food court here on campus that is open today. There are also several other close by off-campus options. If you registered early and received an email to send us your t-shirt size, make sure that you've picked that up outside at the registration table. We have evaluations at the end of each session. Each room will have a monitor who will pass those out for you, and we very much would appreciate your feedback, which we will use as we plan future events. At lunchtime, out here in the main lobby here, some of our speakers will be signing their books so that if you have either brought books with you that you would like one of our speakers to sign, or you would like to purchase some of those books, we have representatives from the EIU bookstore who will be here selling them at lunchtime. Please come back after lunch because we have a very exciting day planned all the way through to the closing. Our event will close with performances by students who have created stories, narratives, based on a compilation of interviews that they've done with school children who have been bullied. It's very powerful, and I think you'll be sorry if you miss it, and you won't be sorry if you stay for it. We also have the representation of bullying through the arts, because the College of Arts and Humanities is one of our supporters and sponsors. So we have Antoine Thomas and his EIU dancers providing an interpretive dance related to bullying before our final event, which is the balloon release in the quad, and hopefully the weather will cooperate so that we can get outside and do that. Okay? I welcome you here. We're excited that you're here. And at this time, I would like to invite Jennifer Roscoe to the podium. Dr. Pearson invited Jennifer Roscoe to come and introduce our keynote speaker because of their association and also because of Jennifer's work on the Beyond Bullying project. She was impressed by her genuine spirit, her caring and commitment to the issue of bullying, and it's very fitting that she is here with us today to introduce our keynote. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, in the past, we've done stories on bullying here and there, but last November, there was a 10-year-old girl who hung herself. And her parents, her family said it was because she was bullied. And suddenly, we were flooded with calls and Facebook posts. And we realized this was a bigger problem than we ever imagined. And it wasn't going to be just one story that was going to be able to take care of it. We really had to get into this issue. Parents were clamoring for it. So were teachers, administrators, educators. So we started to put together some ideas to do an hour-long special called Beyond Bullying. And we had roundtable discussions with parents and with kids and with educators, but we needed an expert. Everyone we talked to said, you have to get Dorothy. She is an educational psychology professor at U of I. She's studied bullying for 20 years. She's written 4 books. She's nationally known as an expert on bullying. She's given countless seminars to parents and teachers and educators. If you hear her speak, you are lucky to hear what she has to say. What I know is that she was willing to help us out in any way possible. It's very rare for a guest to come on and say, I'll take live questions right there. I'll do whatever you need. I'll Skype with you. I can be there with you. She was so helpful to our special and really made it so worthwhile. And what also we loved about her is that she, and she'll talk about this, kind of blows out the conventional wisdom about bullying, goes beyond the stereotypes, and she's making us take a new look at it and realize, like we just saw, so many people think, oh, it's boys will be boys, and I was bullied when I was a kid, and this is never going to change. But we decided if we can do this special and we can continue to do these stories and Beyond Bullying, if we can help one kid, then we have done our job. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Dorothy Espalash.
Good morning. So do you want me to finish at 10? You want me to get them back on time? Yes, you would like that. I appreciate that. So even less time. That's great. 20 years, 30 minutes. Okay. Well, it's just always wonderful to be in Central Illinois. I feel like I live in hotel rooms and in D.C. and pushing folks to really pay attention to this issue, but it's always nice to be home. I have about 30 minutes to share 20 years of research, so we'll see. But what I'd like to do is to set the stage for the day. And oftentimes when I present, when I'm talking to parents or teachers or, our wonderful legislators across the country, is that you must start a day like this abandoning any of your conceptions about bullying. The media, love the media, but the media has contributed to one really good thing, raising the public awareness around the bullying issue, one that's been around for 20 years. I've been warning all of us for this for 20 years. You haven't been listening. But 2, there's also almost a panic, and a panic that is going to prevent us from really doing good work on the ground if we don't just kind of slow down a little bit. I understand the panic. If your child's being victimized, then it feels like the entire universe is falling out from under you. But at the same time, if we continue to kind of think that there's Band-Aid approaches and simple solutions, I will be up here in 15 years, right before I retire, saying, this was, I've warned you. I warned this country 10 years ago that what we were seeing in our data and research and what kids were saying was exactly what we're finding now. And that is that there's bullying, that it's not an epidemic, but it hasn't decreased in our country, okay? So we're going to talk, we've been at it for a while. Please note my email. Email me. I do bullying prevention 24/7, right? I slept 2 hours last night. I'm so excited to talk to you about some of what we know, right? So please email me at espelage@illinois.edu. If I do not get back to you really fast, just email me again. It does not hurt my feelings to have reminders and say, really, I need your help. And if I can't help you, I'll find somebody in Central Illinois to help you. So we've been at it for a long time. My first study was in Mary Miller Middle School in Georgetown, 1997, when we sat with American kids in Central Illinois and said, what is going on? And in 1997, kids said bullies are popular. 1997 in Central Illinois, we knew kids that bullied were popular and had high social status, yet we did nothing about it, really. And that's just one of many findings. But we've been at it. I'm not only just kind of an academic that I rarely am in my office. I'm sure my chair of my department's like, what are you doing, talking to teachers and students all the time, and you're in schools? I'm in schools. Last night I worked with a group of parents in Wheeling that was very much concerned about the Hispanic population that's growing in that community, and they feel like they're targets of bullying because of some challenges with language. Last week I was in Eastern Illinois University working with your administrators. Your Central Illinois administrators heard a message for 8 hours last week that probably made them think a little bit. Hopefully they talked to you after they came back to their buildings. And so I know what it's like out there. I know that my projects are in Chicago Public Schools. I know that teachers are striking. I know that it's unhappy out there. And to ask them to do social emotional learning, bullying prevention on top of No Child Left Behind and benchmarking and accountability is a struggle, right? So I'm going to tell you the realities about bullying prevention, not because I just sit in my office and analyze data, but because I talk to kids, parents, and actually try to do some of this work on the ground. I think it's very important for us to start this day with a reality check, with the public awareness, which is great, right? I should be happy. It's good job security. I just wish it would happen 10, 15 years ago. We would have been much further ahead. But with this public awareness comes some misconception. And if we chase down these misconceptions, we're going to, again, end up not doing the right thing and changing what is a societal problem, right? It's not a school problem. It's a society problem. Bullying is entrenched. I've written about this for 2 decades. It is so part of our fabric, right? That's why you can say boys will be boys. It's part of our fabric. When I have the National Coaching Association call me in 2011 and say they think they're part of the problem, you know we have a lot of work to do. When there are 3 studies published on bullying within the PE classroom, you know we have a lot of work to do. When I have to pay and feed teachers to implement social emotional learning programs in our schools, we have a lot of work to do. Now, what I have listed up here is if you really pay attention to all the media and you're not reading all of my articles, which I understand that you might not be reading my articles, you might think that bullying is an epidemic. In fact, bullying rates have not changed, and in some schools they've went down, right? But that doesn't really sell newspapers. Let's sell the newspapers to put a panic in all the parents out there that in fact bullying is an epidemic. It's not. The bully-suicide link. You will even see the word has now been put together, bully-cide. That somehow kids that are chronically victimized in our schools are doomed to have suicidal ideation and attempts. This is absolutely not true. We are working at the national level so that we can educate media about how to cover youth suicides. We know very clearly what happens when media covers suicides. We don't cover adult suicides, right, Jennifer? You don't. You cover youth suicides, and what does it lead to? It leads to clusters, right? I'm from the North Shore of Chicago. In Lake Forest, we had kids that, in an affluent high school up there, they would take their car and go over the tracks. The media covered this, so the metro train would hit them. We had 3 clusters within 2 weeks. We know this. Research is very, very solidly, especially when media covers suicide in this way. When they cover bullying, they talk about what? 80% of the time, suicides. 10% of the time, positive prevention approaches. 10% of the time, legislation. Why are we covering this? Why is bullying always kind of linked to the suicide? Let me tell you, for parents in the room and educators and teachers, 15% of the suicides, youth suicides, can be explained by peer victimization, 15%. What's the other 85%? Mental health issues? lack of access to mental health issues, comorbid diagnosis. What you don't see in the bully movie is one of the youth that committed suicide there had a number of diagnoses like ADHD, OCD, and other types of. Lee Hirsch decided not to tell you that story, right? So there was comorbid types of issues that was co-occurring. So the bully-suicide link, we're working on it to kind of dispel this. This is not going to do us any good thinking that kids that are chronically victimized are going to kill themselves. There's actually some really resilient kids that are victimized day in and day out, but find the strength through their family and the support of an adult or their peers to actually grow up being pretty solid kids. Do they wish they had a different childhood? Most certainly. But they're not all contemplating suicide, so we need to change that. There's also this notion here as we're criminalizing bullying, because in this state, legislation is driven by the parents that have lost their children. When you lose a child to suicide, most certainly you're angry and you're going to go to Springfield and you're going to say you're going to do something, you're going to punish these bullies. If we think that bullies are budding young criminals, again, we're not looking to the data. Let me enlighten you a little bit. The research is fantastic, right? We have two types of bullies in our schools. We have what's called the ineffective aggressor. And those are the kids that probably are on that criminal trajectory. Those are the kids that are just they can't turn it on and off. They're kind of slapped. They're the thug bully. They're so not accepted by the popular peers that they're pushed into deviant peer groups. Once they're pushed into that deviant peripheral peer groups, then they're exposed to deviant behavior. But let me tell you about the bully that oftentimes doesn't show up in the principal's office, and that's the effective aggressor. That's that kid that has what we call heightened theory of mind. I've interviewed them. They're quite charming. You like them. They're attractive. They're popular. They're overrepresented on our athletic groups. And they're popular. They have high social status, so much so that the kids will not turn them in. These kids don't show up in the principal's office. So the principals only see the ineffective aggressor. The effective aggressor kind of flies under the radar. And the code of silence, which is so prevalent in our middle schools in the state of Illinois, will never get broken for that effective aggressor. And that effective aggressor actually we don't know where that effective aggressor goes. That effective aggressor may be a professor. That might be a newscast person. I don't know, right? So we need to think that they're not just budding criminals. So kicking them out of school and putting them on the streets is not necessarily a positive thing. This notion that bullies need to be punished. No, actually, we need to think about bullying as not just a maladaptive behavior, right? We all want to think about it as adults like that's just mean behavior. Well, if it's supported within the context of our schools and it gains them popularity, then we probably should think about the peer norm of shifting that norm within the school rather than just punishing them. Because bullying is a peer group process, right? When we were interviewing those kids at Mary Miller, they're like, I'm a 6th grader. Next year, I'm going to be the bully. I'm a victim now, and we do it in groups, and that's how you become popular, and that's how you work up the hierarchy within peer groups, is to engage in this kind of bullying behavior. This notion that bullies come from dysfunctional families, I'll tell you what, 17% of our kids in middle school are bullies. I've had 2 parents in 20 years admit they raised a bully, 2. When I was talking to the Wheeling parents last night, I said, some of you may have really good kids that get involved in this group process, and they may be the ringleader bully. Until we face that fact that some of us could raise those kids that are engaging in high rates of this behavior because it works for them, then we will continue to miss this moving target. All kids can get involved in bullying. This is a beautiful piece. As much as this isn't an academic conference, I heard, I'm very quite academic but practical at the same time. I encourage you to email me and get this paper if you really want to start thinking about how bullying works for not just kids but adults. Think about your own workplace environment. There's some very skillful manipulation that might be called bullying, right? And it works for many a profession. It actually is a skill that helps you in many a profession achieve, status. So we need to think about, bullying not as always maladaptive, but somewhat adaptive. And given my time, I can't really go into this, but this is a brilliant article. Make a pot of coffee, read it about 5 times. Really think, because if in fact bullying is adaptive in our middle schools, but yet all of our prevention programs take this approach of we just need to kind of get it out of them, right? Then that's why we might be failing in bullying prevention. So definition, wow, what a disaster, I have to tell you. I'm on a federal task force with the Centers for Disease Control and 20 experts. We started with the definition. After a year, we had 3 different words in that definition, right? Typical academics. We didn't want to abandon. This definition's been around since the 60s and 70s from the Norwegian researcher Dan Olweus. We've never tested it. We've never evaluated it within the context of North America. And when you do, you find out very interesting things. Kids don't even call what we're calling bullying. They put a label on it because we feel better about having that label. But kids actually say that it's just kind of mean, rude behavior. Hurtful things happen. Do they talk about the repetition? Maybe they do. They hope it's not repeated. Is it intentional? All aggression is intentional. Even if I just punch you, that's probably intentional, even if it's a little bit reactive. What appears to be the hallmark difference between aggression and more specifically bullying is the power dynamic. That if in fact I have a victim that says to me, or a target that says, I cannot defend myself because that kid's more popular, or that kid's bigger, or that kid's dad is the sheriff of a town, right? I've been in lots of places in Illinois. There's all kinds of scenarios that go on. Then that child might be being bullied, but they're actually a target that can't defend themselves. We like to put kind of bullying on everything, and it's so intriguing as we do these bullying prevention programs, and kids can recite the definition and the different types of bullying. They go underground, right? So I was working with this group of 4th graders, and we were talking about the definition, and they could recite it, and la. But all of a sudden, we started to observe them through the prevention program, and we're noticing that they're doing really odd gestures. With their finger up their nose right here, and then tugging on their ear. And it turns out this is fat, you're ugly. So they had created their own code, right? We have parents coming to principals saying, these two, I heard this yesterday with teachers yesterday, my daughter was friends with this other girl for 2 years, and now they're not friends anymore, and I think she's being bullied. Defriending, friendships that end, not necessarily bullying. We have parents that say sighing and rolling of the eyes in the classroom is bullying, right? So we need to, in some ways, get a handle around this. Unfortunately, when we provide a definition to kids with on bullying, they don't pay attention to it. If they think they're being targeted and bullied, they just pay attention to the word bullying. This is kind of an academic argument. We can argue about it as academics. Principals are really struggling. They really are struggling with, I'm not sure if it is. And just because a parent thinks it is, it doesn't mean it is. And also, if they're waiting for something to be repeated, this is disastrous because it's probable repeated. And why is that important? Because kids that are targets of bullying in our schools change their behavior so that they do not get targeted. I talk to kids all the time, like, what do you do to protect yourself? I don't walk down that certain hallway. I don't go to the cafeteria for lunch. I sit in a room. Right? So they're trying to prevent this from happening, repeating again, because they know that, in fact, it probably will. It's just not one-time aggression. So we have to be careful about repeated. And then what if you go into the cyberbullying context? If somebody posts something on Facebook, which is mostly just rude behavior, right? There's not a lot of sexting. There's not a lot of posting of inappropriate pictures. We've got to calm ourselves around that, too. But if they post it and 1,000 friends see it, I think that's pretty darn repeated. I'm not sure if I'd have to wait for another one. So you see the academic arguments we're having, which has held us up for so many years. When we think about prevalence, the only thing that's changed in this slide over the last 20 years is kids are getting younger and younger when they're displaying some of these behaviors. So much so that there's quite a bit of work with preschool playgroups now that we're seeing some of this exclusionary social aggression happening in preschool playgroups, which I kind of just blame our society of focusing on play dates and mom and dad groups where they will exclude kids based on how it is that the moms or the dads get along, right? That's just not my sociological explanation for that, one potential explanation. We're introducing kids into exclusion when we create their own kind of, not the play dates are bad, but there's kids used to kind of figure this stuff out on their own as well. But consistently, 15% of kids in 3rd through 8th grade are chronically victimized. What do I mean by this? This is not a USA Today statistic. This is kids reporting being a target 63 times in the last month. This isn't lifetime. This isn't the last year. This isn't one item. These are 4 items: name calling, pushing, threatening behavior. 17% are your ringleader bullies. Right? So we're already at 32% of the population of middle school, and this is consistent across the state of Illinois, across the country in the studies that we do. The very concerning group, not that we're not concerned about the others, is the 8% of bully victims. And these are the kids that were victimized, and as opposed to becoming depressed and withdrawn and anxious and disengaged from school, they actually become aggressive themselves. Right? So these are our school shooters, if you will, when they did the Secret Service report, and they said, what did these school shooters have in common? Not the Columbine shooters, though. In fact, they were victims of bullying. And if you know anything about psychology, if you're a victim and then you become aggressive yourself, in some sense you've identified with that aggressor, right? And psychologically, that's a big leap. And so then you almost become desensitized to it because you're directing that aggression. These kids have the highest rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidality in our schools. These kids need more than what we do in schools now. We do what we call universal primary prevention programs. These kids need more directed attention. If you have these children in your classroom, or if this is your son or daughter, get them direct mental health access ASAP, right? I mean, this is consistent. It's not just my work. We need to pay attention to that. But isn't it remarkable that 60% of kids stand around, contribute, egg it on? And what are we doing for them? I'll tell you one thing. We have published quite a bit on bystanders and why kids don't intervene. And it's not as simple as us adults giving them power, empower the bystander, right? It's not that simple. They really have a decision tree. If they don't know the victim, they will not intervene. If they fear that the bully group will turn on them, they will not intervene. If they're boys, less likely than girls. Older kids, less likely than younger kids. And if it's not a cool thing to help a victim, they won't do it. If it will cost them social status and popularity in middle school, they will not do it. So you better create a climate in middle school where that behavior is rewarded by the peer group, not by the adults. You can hand out any little tokens you want, little fake money. If it's not endorsed by that peer group, then you're not going to see that change over time. So we need to start thinking very clearly about what the research is saying in 2012. It's funny that research in some way in science is kind of like the bad word. But what's intriguing about it is I don't make this up. We actually go talk to kids. We just kind of summarize it in a way that it's consistent and helpful. Let's talk very briefly. You do have Justin here, who's the expert in cyberbullying. And hopefully I'm not contradicting what he's going to say, but I'm going to show you some national data. So keep those numbers in mind, right? We got 15, 17, 8. We got 40% of kids that are actively involved, right? Chronically targeted, chronically directing that aggression, or turning it on others as their other target. Let's talk about cyberbullying. This is the national data, right? So sometimes we have regional data, sometimes we have national data, and you really want that national data. And so these are Michelle Yabar's Growing Up with Media data that's published and supported by the Centers for Disease Control. What you notice here is the percentage of youth reporting bullying. 39%, pretty close to my 40%, right? Remarkable bullying involvement face-to-face. It is still the most prevalent form. Now, when I talk to teachers, I do recognize that I understand when there is an internet aggression or electronic aggression incident, I know it feels like it's just so prevalent because it's just kind of icky, right? We've been dealing with face-to-face. It feels like, okay, that's much more palatable. 10% of kids are victimized by the phone, which this is going to change because now the phone is a computer. Is this not a computer? Yes, it's my computer. It's a Facebook. It's Formspring. It's everything I want it to be. 14% through text messaging. We are seeing an increase nationally in text messaging victimization, but still 14%. 17% online, 10% in some other way. What you notice from the pie graph here is that for the most part, 56% of kids are not bullied at all. Kind of again, back to that 40-60 split. And then 21% in one of those domains, and then lower for across those domains. But the message is that face-to-face is alive and well in our schools. What about when they are cyberbullied? Where is it happening? Notice this graph, 83% they're at home. When they are the target of electronic aggression, they are at home. Now, why would it say 15% at school? Well, in Central Illinois, which I learned from your administrators last week, adults are so tired of confiscating the cell phones that they just let them have cell phones in the classroom, right? And they have to deal with the consequences if, in fact, they turn them on. Well, 15%, and nationally, it appears that they are using those cell phones to direct aggression towards others. But 83% of the cyber stuff is happening at home. Overall, the national data say more than 80% of youth who use the internet are not cyberbullied. Most kids use social media pretty darn responsibly. And it's a heck of an academic tool as well. So let's not pathologize this space. 75% who are bullied and harassed were not upset. They actually talk about just rude behavior, and they will defriend people, and they will stop instant messaging with somebody that's coming after them. You have to be concerned about a kid that stays in a conversation on Formspring when they're having nasty things said to them. We do have an 8% of kids that are getting it hit from all directions, face-to-face. Again, that 8% maps onto that bully victim category, so we should start thinking about that overlap. And again, as I said, text messaging victimization may be increasing. Here's a book of mine. You can probably get that on Amazon for $1. It's a really great book. I encourage you. In that book, we have about 100 articles written. This is a complex phenomenon. So you can only imagine how frustrated I get when schools are like, we're going to bring in a drama act. We're going to bring in this expensive keynote speaker. We're going to bring in this, all kinds of things that kids are doing. In fact, I was in a school yesterday where they take their bullies, instead of suspending them, they take them through a 3-hour intervention. I'm like, 3 hours? 3 hours. I was like, do you know how complex bullying is? Do you think a kid's just going to knock it off after 3 hours? No, they're going to go through the 3 hours. It's like a glorified probation, right? They're going to say what you want to hear, and then they're going to go back right to what they do, because bullying is ingrained within the social ecology of our society. In families, that child's individual propensity plays out as families are at risk, as the schools are doing nothing, as the adults in the schools bully one another, right? As we're in a society in which kids are confronted with rude behavior. And so lots of articles written about this. Is very, very complex. A kid is not destined to be a bully based on their individual characteristics or even their early childhood experiences. It gets played out as there's a cumulative risk across these domains. And many kids bully at home but don't bully at school because they can switch, code switch, right? So think about the adaptiveness across contexts, very complicated. So how are we doing? Well, this is always the positive part of my talk. This is where I speak truth. Now, as much as folks are out there making money, I mean, this is a money-making venture, bullying prevention. But if you're speaking truth, then you're probably broke, because we're not very successful in the United States. Our European partners are really doing well. They're reducing bullying by 30 to 50%. That is not the case in the United States. The first meta-analysis was conducted in 2008, and any graduate students here get that meta-analytic study. That will be the best review you've ever got a hold of. Our first one was in 2008. We have over 100 programs that are being sold to schools. Why do we have over 100 programs being sold to schools, but yet our meta-analysis first one was in 2008? And how many studies were in that? 16. Means people are marketing. We have former teachers writing books. We have testimonials. We have families that have lost their children developing foundations and curriculum, not informed by research, not informed by what the kids are saying the dynamics are in our schools and communities. And so we're failing miserably. 2 of the studies in the United States were published. So we're basing all the proven programs on 2 published studies. I don't know about you if you take that pill that was based on 2 studies. Right? So, in social science, it's our own fault in some ways. But if Dorothy's not so negative here on a Friday, then you can look at that and say, okay, I'm going to lower the p-value. You guys remember p-values, right? And I'll make a mistake 10% of the time instead of 5. What we see is as kids start to accept each other more, as teachers develop competency in responding to it, then we're in that right direction. But the reality is we have not reduced bullying in our schools. So overall, with a meta-analytic perspective, the Farrington and Tofte-Campbell collaborations now evaluated upwards of 70 to 80 studies. And those studies that work in European countries, not in the United States, actually include parents use multimedia and target teachers' competence. So there's some we could take from, if you feel that Norway and Finland, and the ways in which teachers are trained there, and the ways schools are in Norway and Finland, apply to Central Illinois, then we might have something to say. I would think that, in fact, we should probably think of the US context. So the slide used to say, why are we failing? And I'm trying to be more positive. I'm saying, pushing the field forward. What do we need to do? Why are we failing? We need to recognize that bullying is not in a vacuum, right? We now know in our studies, and my graduate students just down the road, modeling complex longitudinal analyses, kids that are targets of bullying are involved in some delinquency. Remember those ineffective aggressors? Some of those that are targets are actually engaging in alcohol and drug use to cope with their victimization. Some of the ringleader bullies may not like what they're doing, and they're actually using drugs as well, alcohol and drugs in middle school, okay? And so we need to think about, as we think about the complexity of schools and the pressure that's on schools and teachers, I'm not sure if schools need a program for every problem they have. Let's look at the research of Hawkins and Catalano for the last 50 years. It says there's an overlapping risk and protective factors that contribute to drugs and alcohol among adolescents, teenage pregnancy, aggression, bullying, anger. And that was the point of my talk, was to say, let's really try to think about what we know from developmental research with the complexity of the bullying dynamic and create a space where kids can try to get to know one another through social emotional learning, Because it's really, really hard to victimize somebody that you truly know and can respect their differences. But with No Child Left Behind and the pressure on teachers, there's no space for relationship building. You know this if you're in these high-pressure cooker schools. There's no space for that. Now, we are a social-emotional learning state, right? We're one of the only states that has SEL standards. But when I have teachers say, I don't have 50 minutes a week to talk to kids about social-emotional learning, like empathy and perspective taking, then we have to think about these barriers and recognize that if I could give a school a program that's going to help them with their anger issues among their kids, their alcohol and drug issues, possibly increase academic functioning, and by the way, we might address some of your bullying behavior, that might be the better way to go. We need to consider those interventions that address all of these risk and protective factors. And as I said, programs should address the peer and social norms in schools. We also need to recognize that the demographics in Norway is quite different. The one program that many of the federal agencies in this country are endorsing is saying proven actually only works for white kids. And in some contexts that might be okay, but if you know anything about the demographics, they're shifting all over this country. And the demands that are in place for some of these kids we have to consider. What about classroom management too, right? So I'm over there in the College of Ed and we train pre-service teachers. And what do we know about pre-service teachers when they go out? 60% of them in their first 5 years are clinically depressed. They're leaving in droves from the profession. Why? Because of disruptive behavior. Teaching is one of the top 5 hazardous occupations in the country. And we're pushing an agenda around teacher violence. So that's the climate, and I want to hand them and can you please, on top of everything else, go in there and deliver a social-emotional learning program and really rev that up with affective discussions, and why not alcohol and drug use and sexual harassment and sexual orientation? Just, because the College of Ed at the U of I trains you so well for all of that, right? So we have to think about classroom management. I mean, it's tough enough to manage a classroom, many kids, but then when you have to start talking about very sensitive issues, that's another skill set, right? You got to be a social worker, psychologist, all on top. And kids say the darndest things, don't they? Right? They'll throw you off. We also have to seriously consider, I'm still in schools where they say, no, thank you. We don't need your help. We don't have a bullying problem. There's still a motivation issue. Yes, we're charged up now. I watched that video. It's great. My concern is it's going to fade away. Now, my colleagues say it's not going to fade away. I don't know. Maybe I'm just, But anyway, the reality is we need to think about, as these programs are being put on list as proven programs, for example, the 3-hour program that's going to help us with bullying, we need to consider all of the research that I've kind of talked about and infuse that in improvements. I want to point out this meta-analysis here. This is positive. We went in and evaluated 12 school-based interventions that targeted bystander intervention and actually gave the kids, talked about the barriers to intervention. I mean, why do you not intervene? And what skills do you need to intervene? And there's lots of statistics here, but the programs worked in high school. Effect size 0.40. What's the comparison there? Usually we get an effect size of 0.13. In high school, we got 0.40. So the bystander interventions, where the kids were given an opportunity to really talk about the barriers and practice intervention and were supported by their peers to do that, we found an increase in intervention and a reduction in bullying. Much lower effect size in middle school, but if you know anything about middle school, that's the last thing you want to do is set yourself apart, right? You just want to go with the crowd. If we look to that meta-analysis, we also know that parent training is key. So when I was talking to the parents in Wheeling last night, I said this is a matter of parent-school communication. For too long, parents have just assumed that the school was doing the right thing. And then only they find out that, in fact, the school wasn't. Well, you need to go in there and talk. So we have to understand parent training. Increased playground supervision, non-punitive disciplinary methods. As I said, homeschool communication. We need to think about classroom rules, classroom management. We used to train our pre-service teachers to understand their classrooms as a social ecology. We don't do that anymore. We know from Phil Rotkin's work at the University of Illinois that those classrooms that have a hierarchical structure among the peer groups have higher rates of aggression. But teachers don't know how to make that non-hierarchical and more egalitarian. They don't know how to do that. We don't train them to do that anymore. We used to do social mapping with pre-service teachers. We need to get back to them understanding that that little classroom is a society with leaders and followers, right? Great work. And how about embedding it in the curriculum? If we continue to see bullying prevention or social emotional learning program as an add-on, it will be pushed to the side, right? Kids now in our randomized clinical trial are saying we have second step and we make the teachers teach it to us because they always want to say, no, we don't have time for that, we got to do this other thing. And so kids are holding them accountable to make sure that it's embedded and it's part of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Right? And so many schools in this country are also starting to score schools and kids on social emotional learning standards. It's exactly what we need to do. Why it is that we think character education is something to laugh about. Why it is when I'm getting my hair dyed in Champaign and I hear a teacher saying, "Since when did I become a teacher to teach manners?" You kidding me? Yes, you teach everything. This is it, your key. Yes, manners would be one of those things you probably have to teach. So what are the important skills? And I'm going to spend just a few minutes on this and then impart ways, because I could be here all day and we would just have a great time. That is for sure. So in our social emotional standards, these are Illinois standards, and really it's around social emotional learning is an umbrella term that came out of a 1994 conference where the school climate, character ed, positive behavior supports all came together, and they called it social emotional learning. Here we want kids to develop self-awareness, understanding their own emotions, their personal qualities, and understand who's around them to support them. And social emotional learning works, by the way. If you look at the meta-analysis of Durlac, schools that have social emotional learning have 11% higher academic test scores. That's what people want to hear, right? But they also have less disruptive behavior. So as kids can regulate themselves and interact with one another, there's less aggression and there's better opportunities for learning. So they're going to recognize feelings, empathy, perspective taking, similarities, differences. This is important. I remember 1998, I think I was on Oprah, and I said, "Oprah, the problem is kids don't respect diversity. They should embrace diversity, right? We have beautifully diverse schools. Embrace it." I still say it, it's 2012, okay? That is a long time ago. But it's also about decision making, because ultimately we want these social emotional learning skills to be life skills so that we can build a competent workforce, right? And so it's not just lecturing, it's really giving them skills. So it includes risk and protective factors, the bullying research, understanding recent brain research that an adolescent brain develops at the age of not 15, not 20, 25. So the university students, their brain's not developed, right? So when we say to them, "What are you thinking?" They weren't thinking, their brain's not developed. Age of 25, right? When your sons and daughters graduate from college at 22 and then they move back in with you, their brain is still not developed. I'm just telling you. So we consider this. So social emotional learning has to be repetitious, right? Because impulse control is real. And they have to really think through what they're doing, and they need practice to do that. And it has to be almost K through 16 at this point. Positive approaches to problem behavior. For too long, we've said, stop bullying, stop bullying. Why don't we talk about developing healthy relationships? This would be really beneficial. My research says bullying is associated with homophobic bullying, that is associated with sexual violence, that's associated with teen dating violence, and look at that, it's associated with domestic violence. All right, let's talk about healthy relationship skills to prevent that continuing of the need for control and dominance to escalate into adult aggression. At the end, well, I'll make sure, if you want this, we'll make sure that the conference people that put this conference together actually have these studies. The last two studies, I'm just going to flip through really fast, are randomized clinical trials. This one was done in a pre-post in 6th grade in California, and in 3rd through 5th grade in California. They found very significant results. Teachers report an increase in social competence. This is a randomized clinical trial, so some schools got the intervention, some did not. This is the best design ever. Okay, this is science at its greatest, because you're isolating all those confounding variables. They got the effect size that everybody else gets, 1.13. So there was reductions in bullying in the intervention schools, but not necessarily, and in the control schools, usually there's an escalation. Students also reported that teachers and staff and other kids intervened more, and they perceived a more positive school climate after 1 year of social emotional learning, 3rd through 5th grade. Very encouraging. Let's move to middle school. This is a randomized clinical trial that's happening in Danville. It's happening in Joliet, Chicago Public Schools, in Peoria. This is great, because this is going to put Illinois on the map. It's the largest study being funded right now, and we've got some beautiful results. This is the middle school program called Second Step. These kids are now in the 8th grade. We're in the 3rd year. These kids are receiving the 8th grade curriculum. They've had 28 lessons across 6th and 7th grade. Jennifer, I encourage you to come into those schools, bring your camera crew, and watch how they talk about social emotional learning, and watch how it's changed the climate of those schools in central Illinois. So it includes empathy, communication, bullying prevention, emotion management, problem solving, and substance abuse prevention. And don't the teachers love those lessons, because they don't know how to touch substance abuse prevention, but here we have scripted programs that talk about that. What do we find? I want you to pay attention to that second bullet there. Individuals in the intervention school after 1 year of that 6th grade curriculum, we had 30% reduction in physical fighting. And if you know anything about Peoria and Danville and Joliet, bullying is the least of their worries in some of those schools, right, in Chicago public schools. 30%, that's huge from a public health perspective, especially when you have the Centers for Disease Control saying that they're going to reduce bullying by 5% in 5 years. I'm like, I got 30 in 1, okay? So this is pretty good. We also, hot off the presses, because we had a grant due last week, we found actually reductions in alcohol and drug use onset among these kids after 2 years. And so social-emotional learning not just addressed the aggression, but it also addressed the onset of alcohol and drugs in the intervention schools. The kids in the control school started using, they didn't in the intervention school. So let me sum up here. 20 years of summary. So what do we need to do? One, we need to give kids life and social skills, not just knowledge about bullying. It is very, very clear that bullying co-occurs with other risky types of behaviors, and we need to be much more smarter about this. And if it does create a space where they can learn and test scores increase, that's what our federal government cares about right now. We need to develop secondary and tertiary programs. Some kids that are targets need more. So not just universal programs, but those kids that are really at risk and have a history of trauma at home and victimization at the school. Let's think very creatively about those kids and make sure they don't fall through the cracks. I'll be talking at 11 o'clock about a huge part of our research program that looks at the causal link between bullying and homophobic bullying, and how homophobic bantering, name-calling, that so many teachers just let go because they think it's benign, right? Because they think when they say you're so gay that they mean actually that they're happy. We now know that that is actually a training ground for sexual violence in our schools. The best way to demonstrate that you are not gay is to publicly sexually harass one another in middle school. We also need to understand that most of the phenomena that we're talking about around bullying and homophobia, bantering, and sexual violence is maintained through the peer norms and code of silence. We must also recognize that students are witnessing and involved in violence at home. Number one predictor of bullying perpetration in central Illinois is sibling aggression perpetration. And this isn't like I want the Wii controller. This is I have been hospitalized, or fear I'm going to be hospitalized because a sibling has aggressed upon me, right? For me, it's very simple. It's a proxy for family violence. Family violence is probably happening in that home. So we should really focus on the extent to which this recession is leading to unemployment, alcohol and drug use, domestic violence. Then you're exposed to that sibling aggression, bullying in our schools, right? See how complex the layers of this one kid sitting in front of you that you want to suspend. Consider the use of technology, which Justin is going to do a beautiful job just any minute when I'm done. Simple strategies. We've done quite a bit of PE studies in this state. There is still Dodgeball Friday. That's probably happening right now in some of the middle schools in central Illinois. That is actually Dodgeball Friday that's happening in central Illinois is prohibited by their very association. PE teachers are told not to do this, yet it's such a tradition that kids are just beating each other right now. Use data to make decisions. As much as I can present national and regional data, what's happening within the context of your schools and where your kids are attending? Students can play an important role. I think increasingly Lady Gaga and her Born This Way Foundation is saying we need to include the youth. We definitely need to include the youth, but understand that youth movements are not going to solve this problem. We all have to solve it together. Have an open door policy for counselors to address the issue. Make sure your school has an anti-bullying policy that's consistent. Most teachers and administrators don't know their anti-bullying policy at the state level. I encourage you to look at the handbooks that you have parents sign. Make sure the adult workplace models healthy social relationships. I spend a lot of time in schools where the adults are really unhealthy, and it's not a surprise that the kids are emanating some of those behaviors. I think we also need to be much more respectful when we work with families and take a strength-based approach when we work with families and not pathologize them. And the saying that I hear on a weekly basis, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, is not helpful when we're thinking about preventing some of these problems. That may be true, but I'm not sure where that's actually going to help us. Use videos in classroom discussion. We have generations of kids that are on the go. We've got to keep them stimulated. Prevention programs need to keep up with how these kids are engaging. Social-emotional learning and positive behavior supports are finally talking together, which is nice. So lay that foundation of positive behavior supports for expectation, but then bring in the social-emotional learning so these kids have skills like empathy, perspective taking, active listening, and that's one approach that seems to be promising within the context of our schools. If we can get teachers and administrators to buy in and actually take 50 minutes a week to give kids these skills. Thank you. Done.
Thank you again to Dr. Aspelage. I have a couple of announcements. Murphy's Law being what it is, you know, we have some changes to report. If you are attending any of the sessions that are currently scheduled in the Mattoon room, those have been moved here. And part of the reason for that is so that our speakers don't walk all over each other, because there is a very thin partition between those rooms. So we want to make sure that we both have enough space and you know, there aren't distractions for you. So if you are scheduled to hear a speaker in the Mattoon room is now the Grand Ballroom. Okay? I would like to remind you to thank the speakers as you see them through the day. They are all very generously giving their time and expertise today. Take the opportunity to, you know, give them a shout out, say, hey, thanks for coming. Also to anybody on the committee, we could all use a word of encouragement here and there. There is still coffee in the lobby if you want to grab some as you go to your next presentation. We are, of course, running a little late, and we should be caught up by lunchtime. So I imagine your session after this one will probably end around noon, and we'll resume at 1. Okay? All right, enjoy your day.